Anger and protest appears to be spreading across North Africa as rising food prices spark riots in Algeria. But what are the root causes of the unrest in this oil and gas-rich country? And could ongoing protests lead to political turmoil in North African countries? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm James Bays. First it was Morocco, then Tunisia, and now it's Algeria's turn. Hundreds of Algerians have taken to the streets of the capital Algiers, some of them shouting, "Bring us sugar." They're unhappy with the rising cost of food and what they say is a lack of opportunity in the country. They're directing their anger at the government. They don't understand why an oil-rich country is unable to offer a decent life to its people. Hashim Al-Halbara has more.
Angry protesters burning ties, blocking roads and attacking the police with fireworks in the Algerian capital. They are protesting over the rise in food prices and unemployment.
We do not accept this government because we have been suffering for 10 years, and 10 more years are coming and nothing will have changed.
Anti-riot squads deployed in many Algerian cities as a simmering anger threatens massive protests in the oil and gas-rich North African country. These people are very desperate. They say their only hope is migrating to Europe in a quest for better living conditions.
The solution is let us go to Europe. Young people today either end up in prison or immigrate. The government is humiliating us. They're raising the price of sugar. We have to pay the rent, the electricity, water, sugar, and oil. We're all poor.
The riots are a crucial test for the ailing President Bouteflika, who came to power in 1999 amid high hopes that the man would rebuild a country ravaged by a decade-long civil war and an economy in tatters despite the huge mineral resources. Neighboring Tunisia is also grappling with widespread discontent over food prices and unemployment. Those demonstrations were the first in almost 4 decades. And despite government pledges to pour billions of dollars to improve the living standards and curb rising food prices, tensions in Algeria and the rest of North Africa show few signs of abating. Hashim Al-Bara, Al Jazeera.
Joining us now are our guests to discuss this subject in London, the former Algerian diplomat Mohamed Labi Zitout. Zitout was the deputy ambassador to Libya in the early 1990s. Also in London, Jeremy Keenan, an expert on North African security. Keenan has also authored several books on Algeria, including his most recent, The Dark Sahara, America's War on Terror in Africa. And joining us on the line from Algiers, the economist Malik Sarai, now a consultant. He was the former economic advisor to Algeria. President. Let's start in London with Mr. Zitout. Tell me, how significant are these protests? How worried should the government be?
Hi, everybody there. This should be very, it's very serious, and they should be really worried. But unfortunately, the government has lost the touch with the ordinary people for a long time now. And they are not bothered about the difficulties of what people are really fighting every day. Everything it's really mismanaged there. And we find ourselves in a situation where a very rich country with very poor people. Most of the Algerian people are suffering, and probably about 50% are living under poverty line, which make things even worse when people know that there is at least 155 billion, and that's an official figure, $155 billion with the government, plus probably another 40–50 billion dollars, which they don't mention always, which is in USA funds. With this about 200 or more billion dollars, having most of the Algerian youth are haven't got a job, 75%, and that's an official figures again, from those who are under 29 years old haven't got a job, and most of people suffer from the housing conditions, suffer from the transport condition, everything. It's in a mess, and that's why, in fact, this rising price again for the basic foods things are make people really that's enough, it's enough, and let's say that's the straw which broke the back of the camel.
Jeremy Keenan, what's your assessment of all this? Is this just about food?
Well, listening to Mohammed Zitout there, I would agree with everything he's saying. It is extremely serious, and as he said, the government has had no interest or care for the people for a long time. There is one thing I would say, though. The word protest is being used a lot here in media coverage. I would say this is much more than protest, and it's much more than just food prices. The food price situation is really the last straw. It may not be the last straw. Maybe things could get even worse than this. But it's one of just many things the Algerian public have had to put up with and tolerate year after year for at least the last 2 decades. And the word that I'm hearing on the streets in Algiers is the word intifada. This is not a protest, it is an uprising. Whether it'll be successful, of course, is highly debatable. We don't know what will happen today after prayers, whether there'll be curfews. There is a huge mobilization of security forces, probably about 400,000. That is 200,000 police, 160,000 gendarmes, 50,000 special forces. So there is a massive show of repression against a population of some 35 million people who have been suffering enormously. I should also say that in terms of this repression, for the last 2 days, one thing that is very interesting is that the mukhabara, that is the repressive state, the police state, has been fairly careful not to actually fire on and kill rioters. There is a history of this, of course, in Algeria. And this is probably because they are extremely frightened of the situation, and that if they do start shooting and killing, it could get completely out of hand, and that could be the end of things. So what happens later today after prayers, Friday afternoon prayers, will be probably very decisive in telling us, you know, which way this uprising, I think is a better word for it, because it is right across the entire country, which way it'll go. What the imams say, bearing in mind that they're very tightly controlled by the government, so they will be using the mosques to try and dampen down the present situation. So those are my initial comments on this.
Malik Sarai, you are there in Algiers. Do you see this as an uprising, an intifada, as we heard Jeremy Keenan say?
In fact, I am here and very active, and I am living with all these poor people, because even myself, I am just inside. The main problem actually who start is the high price of the food, because mainly we are importing 60% of the food from outside, and we are the first country importing cereals, for example. So when the price goes in 3 weeks more than 80%, no one is capable from this suburb of poor people in the areas around the capital and also in a dozen of the city of Algeria. They cannot support that kind of price. But I would like to correct some data statistics a gentleman from London gave it. They are completely wrong, because I'm an international expert working with international, United Nations and the World Bank and everything. The 75% is wrong, even 50% of people under power is not correct. We in fact have very high, people are out of job, maybe around 14%, but that's 75. It's very wrong. We should not. The problem of Algeria is the bad management, because we are spending more than 350,000 billion US dollars for the next 5 years to build the very big, works like railway, like road, harbor, civil aviation, telecommunications. But the government didn't give much, importance to the people, on terms of human development. That's why the new program coming up is with $156 billion for the next 5 years to try to help, to improve the human development, because we are very, very late.
But Mr. Sarai, this is a case, isn't it, of appalling economic mismanagement, because this soon, if Sudan splits, will be the largest country in Africa. It should have agricultural resources to feed everyone.
No, the agriculture is not producing enough for the consumption. Also, the industry we have one of the weakest industry in Africa. It is the growing of the industry only 1%. But the main problem also, which we have kind of very heavy bureaucracy, and also we have corruption and regionalism, which is not giving the good opportunities of the well-educated people. That's why many of young people would like to go outside. In any case, the main problem is we must correct
Let me.
Yeah, well, let me hear from Mr. Zitout. He's got a point on this, Mr. Zitout.
Let me analyze it,
I'm glad to hear from the government official.
One second, Mr. Sarai. Let's just hear a comment from Mr. Zitout, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear from the government advisor that there is a bad governing and bad governance, and most of people are willing to just to quit Algeria. Algeria, it's when I tell people sometimes that Algeria is 9 times larger than UK, they can't believe it. It's 9 times larger than UK. It's one of the richest country in the region, and by African or Arab parameters, it's a very rich country. But unfortunately, with 98% of the income from the monies coming from just gas and oil, from 62 we are hearing the same discourse, which is the government is building, the government is doing, the government is doing. Since 62, now it's 50 years. After 50 years, people can't believe anymore. It looks like the government and its advisor are telling lies, but they finish by just trusting themselves.
Well, let's get Mr. Sarai to answer that. Let's get Mr. Sarai to answer that, and he is a former advisor to the president. Mr. Sarai.
Yes, sir.
What do you make of those points?
What I said, this is very, very bad distribution of the incomes, because we are really the second country in Africa in terms of riches. Since now we have as a deposit outside not less than $157 billion, but also we have $57 billion in the bank, and we have $10 billion directly to be distributed. The problem is the corruption. The problem is the bureaucracy. The problem is we are not giving the job to the very educated people. We are just controlling. They control between themselves. That's why. But the crisis actually is a crisis of food, not it's not really a crisis of politics.
Okay, Jeremy Keenan, I'd like your assessment on this. 1 minute, Mr. Sarai. You'll get another chance in a moment. Jeremy Keenan, tell us about the resources of Algeria, and particularly the gas and oil.
Well, I was just listening to that interchange there. This question about world food prices is really a bit of a hoodwink. Yes, world food prices are going up, and we all know that it's happening in every country in the world. But the situation in Algeria is that it is an immensely rich country, as the speakers have been saying. The problem with its food situation is that it has completely mismanaged its economy for the last 50 years. The agricultural base of the country has not only been virtually ignored but destroyed. There's also been immense corruption, with some of the best agricultural land being taken over, not illegally, but in very corrupt ways for private development and so forth. And the fundamental problem here is that we have a regime. Yes, the country has potential wealth. It has these figures we're throwing around of 155 in forex exchange and so forth. But we're dealing with one of the most endemically corrupt regimes in Africa. This corruption goes right to the very top, to the president himself. It is riddled, rampant with corruption, and everyone in Algeria knows this, and that is the fundamental problem. So when it comes to food price rises, sure, there are international pressures on this, but there are real unique problems within Algeria itself, which are rooted within an archaic administration, but one which is not just archaic, it is fundamentally corrupt right to the very top. And that is the core of the problem, and that is why the people are in fact rebelling against the state, not just protesting against the food prices themselves.
Mr. Sarai, would you agree about that corruption? Because you're there on the ground and you're working as a consultant with all these companies. Are you seeing it?
Yeah, the corruption, I have seen it. I see it every day. Unfortunately, it's very strong from the down to the top. But once again, the actual crisis is not about the corruption, but is about the cost of the good. But I hope this kind of manifestation from the young people will help the country to try to change the things, particularly, and people are waiting how to come up to, to try to eliminate at least partially this corruption, and also to go against this regionalism, which they give the job to only their friends, their parents. We would like to change. But once again, there is not any political appeal behind. There is not any political leader behind. There is not any official behind this crisis. It's just the young people who would like to have a better life, to have a job, and to have a house.
OK, well, let's ask Mr. Zitout about this. Is it just angry young men, or do they represent a wider section of the population, angry young men fighting for their families who are running out of food?
Yeah, let me tell you one thing. When he say one of your guests from Algiers said that there is no political issue behind this is completely wrong, and this is a really false presentation of the situation. On the next 11th of January, in a few days, Algerian will memorize and will just have the souvenir of the 19 years of the coup d'etat. This is the commemoration of the 19 years of the coup d'etat of the 11th of January on 1992. And since that, really, we have been in a big mess. They started by saying that a coup d'etat was there, and after that, they said that they are fighting terrorism and Islamists and so. And in 10 years of the war of generals against the society, and I will not call it a civil war, it was the war of the generals, of the army, of the caste of the army against really people who want to change, who wanted the change, who want to really to make a difference between the corrupted regime and a new good governance government. But unfortunately, Algeria weren't allowed to elect their leaders, and since that we have just getting false election, and fictitious parliament, fictitious parties. They didn't allow any other political movement to be there as a mediator between the people and the elite, which is ruling the country. And let me tell you that here, this is the picture of one of the most powerful men in the country. This is the chief of the DRS, the Secret Algerian Services, and he's in post since 1990. Since that, we have seen 5 presidents have moved, about 12 prime minister and hundreds of ministers. They changed position, or they just got to retirement, or anyway. But he's still in his position. He was colonel on 1990. Now he's 4-star generals. This is the real ruler. And
Mr. Sarai, let's get your comment on that. You're on the ground in Algiers. A suggestion that the country is run in part by the secret police, the same man, we saw the picture being shown there in London, who was in charge of the security services back in the 1990s when hundreds of people disappeared.
I think there is a confusion with a stable of government and changing every day. We were suffering during the last even 20 years ago. So the country is looking for kind of stabilization. The country is looking for good relation outside. Country is looking for to keep the same people at least who are competent to avoid the problems. But in case of need, we need some kind of change, but not all of the stuff exactly, because we must be more stable than before, because we have engagement in the world, we have program of development, we have program of human development, we have a link. Very important thing about security in the Mediterranean Sea. We have a link with our main partner like France, Italy, Spain. We cannot change every day. But
well, Mr. Sarai, you talk about a programme, but this is the same president who has been in charge now for 12 years. If you look at the official figures for unemployment in Algeria, it's about 10%, but independent organisations put it closer to 30%. A diplomatic cable released, like all those others by WikiLeaks, perhaps sheds some light at one of the causes behind this. It said, in addition to other problems, corruption has reached new heights and does interfere with economic development. That's quite a grim political picture of Algeria, but it isn't particularly different from that of its neighbours, Morocco and Tunisia. Leaked WikiLeaks reports accuse Moroccan royals of using the institutions of the state to coerce and solicit bribes. Speaking of the former and current ruler, it said, While corrupt practices existed during the reign of King Hassan II, they become much more institutionalised with King Mohammed VI. Another leaked report shows of the growing discontent in Tunisia, which was evident with the street protests in recent weeks. That one read, "Corruption in the inner circle is growing. Even average Tunisians are now keenly aware of it, and the chorus of complaints is rising. Anger is growing at Tunisia's high unemployment and regional inequities." Well, let's go to Jeremy Keenan. Do you see a trend here across the region? We've seen protests in other countries. Is this something that's going to spread across North Africa?
Yes, all the North African regimes are fundamentally repressive and autocratic. But I'll say one thing about Algeria, as you've just raised it. The WikiLeaks reports. The American ambassador there in one of these reports actually mentions the president's brothers himself. He actually says the corruption goes right to the very top, even to the president's brothers and to the head of the army. Now, in the case of the president's brothers, there are two things I would just say here. One is the president himself has been charged with embezzlement. This was in 1983 when he was foreign minister, and the total amount of money in today's terms was about 23 million. That is where most of the Bouteflika family wealth comes from. So embezzlement at the level of the president and his family himself has got a long history. As for the two brothers, there was a report, these are mentioned by the American ambassador. As for those two, there was a report last week it was in a London consultancy report, which mentioned that there were allegations of the president's two brothers travelling or sending goods, suitcases to the Gulf states, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, allegedly containing a large number of paintings and other valuables from the state's various palaces in Algiers. So here we have an image of the president's family actually sort of stashing loot out of the country, because that is the word that's been used, at a time when the capital is burning. I mean, this is an appalling image of an appalling situation with a regime which is illegal and corrupt to the very core. And, you know, that must not be forgotten. And that is what the people of Algeria know and understand.
Mr. Zitout, allegations of corruption across the region. Can we see unrest spreading and growing across the region?
Arrest, it's every day. It's an everyday action now. In fact, in North Africa, particularly in Algeria, and let's make it sure that the president himself. We have the problem, and that's why I disagree with the gentleman. We talk about programs. We talk about it's just blah blah. It's just talk. At the end of the day, here is the situation. Look at this lady from where she is eating. This is from rubbish, eating from rubbish, and here. Many Algerians are in her situation. Why we are in this situation? Why people are living in these houses? Look at this picture and see why people are living. It's terrible for when it's a very rich country again. It's very corrupted ruling elite, and it's backed by the army, backed by the secret services who are behind the gentleman, which I show you the picture. This is the only picture of this very strong man who is behind the curtain.
Okay, well, let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. Let me give you the last word to Mr. Sarai, who is in Algiers. Tell me, Mr. Sarai, what do you make of all of that?
The gentlemen, apparently they are giving political discourse or political, but I'm giving the only economical and financial aspect about the situation in Algeria. Apparently also they have more information than us. I'm surprised because I'm living here and I'm seeing every day many ministers, even the head of state. I guess I confirm there is corruption, there is mismanagement, but not the way how the two gentlemen are giving about the picture of Algeria. We have done the maximum in terms of development of big and heavy infrastructure. We didn't have done much about the human aspect, which is given the right of the young people to go outside. This is the real situation.
Why people are protesting? Why people are demonstrating? Why people are writing there? If you have got everything right, if things are working properly, if you have got programs, why people are writing? Why people are burning the capital and other big cities?
We end this programme on a moment of discord between our guests, as there is still discord on the street streets of Algiers and other cities in Algeria. Thank you so much to our guests for joining us here today, and thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you have a comment on today's topic, or if you have a country and an issue that you want us to examine, your comments and suggestions are welcome. Our email is insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'll see you 24 hours from now. Goodbye.